joined, I know you were very much involved with right to education, quality education, education financing. So, when you look back, how do you see that time of in your life, in your career, and your relationship with ActionAid Bangladesh? It's amazing that today we are here to talk about 40 years of ActionAid in Bangladesh. I'm joined by some very interesting individuals who have worked this 40 years with ActionAid in Bangladesh in different capacity. And thanks to technology, that we are able to connect from Washington to London to Dhaka. And also, this will be a great opportunity to hear about the contributions made by these individuals and ActionAid towards the right to education, quality education, education financing. So without much background, because I don't want to spoil it for all of those who are with us on this podcast, I want to reach out to David because he was very much a part of ActionAid globally. And ActionAid started as a UK charity and then it transformed into a federation. But David, often it's said that education is in the DNA of ActionAid. Why is that? I mean, I know children's education is a priority, but why were we given that label?
Well, I think it's because ActionAid started life financed through child sponsorship, and one of the first demands of anybody who was providing support to ActionAid at that time was, I want to see the children that I sponsor able to go to school and achieve a basic education. So ActionAid, right the way from when it started in 1972, was supporting children going to school, and the way in which we worked with education has evolved dramatically over the years, from that individual help to individual children, through school building, through supporting non-formal education, and now more recently working with the rights-based approach to education and really trying to influence both policy and practice at local, national and international levels. So education has always been there as a big priority for ActionAid, and in that sense, I think it's fair to say it's part of the DNA. And I think when ActionAid started in Bangladesh 40 years ago, that slightly predates when I joined. I actually joined ActionAid in 1990, and I first visited Bangladesh in 1993. But it was clear that there was a real appetite to focus on education at that time.
And David, let me share with all of you, is a part of the global team in ActionAid Federation. Would you like to say a few words about yourself?
I'm presently the head of programs and influencing in the Global Secretariat of ActionAid. I'm based in London. But my background is very much in the field of education. I was the head of education for many years in the International Secretariat of ActionAid. And my first involvement in Bangladesh in 1993 was to support the development of an innovative approach to adult literacy, adult learning, called the Reflect approach, which was piloted in Bangladesh, Uganda, and El Salvador between 1993 and 1995, and was actually originally named the Reflect approach in Bangladesh in November 1994 in a big conference there, where we had colleagues from different countries coming to learn about this innovative new Reflect approach. And so that involvement with adult literacy, adult learning linked to empowerment and social change, and the pilot program in Bola Island in Borishal region was my first significant engagement with ActionAid Bangladesh.
Tanveer, may I come to you? That you were actually implementing some of the education program as well as the advocacy and lobbying. When I joined, I know you were very much involved with right to education, quality education, education financing. So how, when you look back, how do you see that time of in your life, in your career, and your relationship with ActionAid Bangladesh?
Well, I don't think there is a short answer to it, but just to say that I joined ActionAid in 2001, so that's 22 years ago, more than half the time that ActionAid Bangladesh has been in place. And that was my first experience of the development sector. And before joining ActionAid, I didn't really know a lot about ActionAid, but I was attracted to the fact that it works on cutting edge rights. And ActionAid was actually the first organization which wanted to work on education financing, which is an area that people thought only is the sort of the within the scope of trained economists or government officials, and it's not something that common people or citizens would want to know or work on. And coming from a finance background, that's the thing that sort of appealed to me, that you need to demystify this whole black box called education budgets, taking it to the citizens and involve them and letting them know that the money spent on their education is basically for coming from them. And working on that, and again, Bangladesh was, we had this multi-country initiative, and David was leading that globally, happening in Bangladesh, Brazil, and in Kenya, if I remember correctly. And so to be part of an initiative which was global in its inception, but very local in its nature, was incredibly attractive. And to be able to engage, and as you have said, Farah, from very local level, at school level, working with parents, students, teachers, and then taking the messages up to the national policymakers, that this is how the money that is being allocated nationally is going down to the schools, and this is how it's being utilized. It was a fantastic sort of learning experience for me. And I know I joined for a very short-term project, but I was so excited by the cutting-edge work that ActionAid was doing, which was beyond the traditional NGO intervention one would think of, coming from, again, outside of the development sector, that I thought, okay, I might as well do it for the rest of my life. And that's how it all
And that's what you're
started.
doing, right? You're still
Indeed.
continuing. So what's your present role? Where are you? Based in Washington, D.C., right?
Yes, so I work for Global Partnership for Education, which is the biggest multi-funder funding mechanism for education. And I manage the relationship and the partnerships with civil society. And I manage a mechanism called Education Out Loud, which is the biggest education advocacy fund in the world for civil society, currently active in 63 countries. And so it's, again, an amazing opportunity for me to apply what I have learned hands-on in ActionAid, starting from Bangladesh and then also working in various regional and global role. And
Do you
help,
remember?
yeah.
Do you remember the school in Chor Montaz and Salajati and the Chor and in Bera and in Jamalpur? You made me walk through miles. You and Farooq made me walk to go to the Chor area and engage with the community there. So does this still stay in your memory? Do you still feel that this is where we have to push and ensure that everybody gets a quality education and there's enough financing for that?
No, absolutely. I think that brings a rare sense of empathy in me when I'm working, again, as you said, sitting in Washington, D.C., 1 block away from White House, where our office is, that what we are doing in this air-conditioned room has profound effect and impact on schools in some of those remote areas and how children benefit from that. And every time I go on a field visit, I was in Papua New Guinea just a couple of weeks back, again in a remote area, it just reminds me how even very different context can be very similar when you look at the violation of right to education, and how, again, the origin that I come from can also help me give my best to support those education systems. So absolutely, those works are never to be forgotten and to be cherished and utilized for the benefit of children.
I'm glad that ActionAid left, Bangladesh left that impact on you. Rashida Appa, who needs no introduction, is known as one of the major advocates for right to education, primary education. She's been the advisor with the government, and she's now leading the CSO Alliance. Rashida Appa, when you think of ActionAid, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? ActionAid Bangladesh. Do you remember when you came together with ActionAid Bangladesh?
Yes, thank you for giving me this opportunity. You see, and let me first congratulate ActionAid, its team, all the people who started the work in Bangladesh 40 years, going back with reflections, memories, etc. Some names also came in, like Zahin Ahmed. I would like to pay my homage here to Zahin because he was one of the followers of Paulo Freire, David. The whole idea of reflect came in from, that kind of spirit and that kind of learning we have. It is wonderful to be connected with, excuse me. It has been always wonderful for me to be part of ActionAid family. And I would really like to consider myself as part of ActionAid family.
Absolutely, Appa, absolutely. We cannot think of
exactly.
you as not a member of the family.
Yeah, exactly. Because what you have been doing, ActionAid, and what I have learned from many of you, like David, like, mentoring some of us, I should say, when I was part of the campaign globally, global campaign for education. David was there, always holding hands, like me, coming from a developing country and then trying to help us in policy advocacy. So what really attracts me or attracted me even now, the same thing, ActionAid's focus from access to equity, equity to quality, and now on financing. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the financing that as individuals, as governments, as communities, we have been trying to focus on achieving our goals in education. And David has been leading that particular campaign, and we have been learning so much. So ActionAid, there are many other people, and there were people like, I'd like to also pay my homage, Nasrin Haq, who left us forever, like Zahin. They were the ones who really inspired us, even people like me. So how did I come to this particular, position or situation where I started working with ActionAid as the head of a coalition where ActionAid has always been instrumental in guiding the coalition, what to go for, how to go for achieving our goals, particularly in networking advocacy. When I started my career here, I really can't resist the temptation of how my life is kind of became that kind of thing, an education campaigner like David. When I started my career as a researcher in one of the institutes of Dhaka University, the prestigious university at that time, as a researcher in education, one of the Harvard graduates, Dr. Sultana Krippendorf, she came here, Bangladeshi origin, but married to an American, came from Harvard University for a research work on how girls are being portrayed in primary school textbooks. And I was assigned to be her research associate. And coming from a middle class background with that kind of, grooming that everybody is equal, my brothers, sisters, everybody. Oh goodness, it was like a spark when I realized that how girls are being projected or portrayed in primary school textbooks. And that changed my whole career. Then I joined this coalition where ActionAid has been so active. And I was lucky to have, the not only the friendship, but also kind of guidance from many people like David and friends like Farah and here Tanvir. We have been working with him, and it's wonderful feeling to be associated with
So,
the
Appa,
last 40 years.
if so Campaign was very much the platform that worked on and has still continued to campaign on rights and quality education. And when you became the advisor to the caretaker government, I remember going to you and talking to you about the importance of flexi calendar, because Bangladesh is very prone to disasters, and our children lose out. And the world didn't understand this. But if you were to draw a comparison with the 2 years of COVID and how education suffered and how important it was to be flexible, I think we were actually ahead of the time, but we couldn't convince our policymakers. So this is how I see ActionAid and campaign relationship evolving. But if you could say a little bit more, do you remember any advocacy we did together or anything that was impactful that you would like to share with our friends who are watching the podcast?
Oh, thank you for reminding that. Well, flexible school calendar is still under, may not be under the spotlight, but government has been thinking about, you remember during COVID period, all of us, we are talking about flexibility in, calendar, school calendar, etc. But they also were interested, the decision makers, to have that kind of health risk to be minimized and how to start the school. That time, I still remember government people were talking about that particular flexible school calendar circular that was given by the Ministry of Primary and Mass Education in 2008. You remember, Farah, we campaigned for it together, particularly for the underprivileged ones. But after that also, David will be remembering, we have been campaigning for that 1 million to reach, particularly from GCE, Global Campaign for Education, and Campaign joined actively in that. And later on, when David and ActionAid, particularly with our Bangladesh ActionAid colleagues, we started campaigning for financing of education. But what financing actually means, we did a lot of our own awareness raising with the help of ActionAid people. Financing doesn't mean pumping money, doesn't only mean pumping money, but proper allocation, judicious utilization. And one other thing came later where we campaigned together. It's the tax justice. We joined the tax justice network because it was an ActionAid pioneer, that movement actually. Globally, regionally, and locally. The tax justice movement actually made us aware of the tax evasion that is happening and the tax GDP ratio, one of the lowest in the world in Bangladesh. We have still been campaigning, and the whole idea came, and ActionAid colleagues actually enlightened us, helped us, and even went for helping us in preparing policy briefs, memorandums to be submitted to the government. Even last year, we promoted this whole idea of cess for education, because the whole idea, Farah, you remember, we went to the finance minister's office together and submitted that memorandum. So it was kind of a, complementing, supplementing each other's efforts, and particularly focusing on right to education, because access has been ensured almost, but even then equity is not there. How about the disabled groups?
Nor is quality.
Yes. And the silent exclusion that has been happening inside schools. Students are coming, but not learning. So a group of students are always being left out. we know it's a silent exclusion. And there also we have been working together, ActionAid, campaign, all other, education NGOs.
If I can bring David in here, David, you did that stunt, one goal, remember in the football and that year. So a little bit on if you can share about the one goal, but also in all your association with ActionAid Bangladesh for all these years, do you see any impacts and changes? I mean, you've heard Rashida mention, but also from where you sit.
So the One Goal campaign was actually linked to the 2010 FIFA World Cup in South Africa. The idea was that it would be an opportunity to raise the global profile of the importance of education, and we did get endorsement from lots of footballers and champions of the sport around the world. And it was the first World Cup ever in Africa, so it was quite a high
in the south.
First in the south of that. I think it was. That's one example of the campaign, of the global campaign for education. The very first meeting in 1999 that set up the global campaign for education, we were there as ActionAid. Oxfam was there, the Global Federation of Teacher Unions was there, Education International, and the Global March for Child Labour, led by Kailash Satyarthi, who went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And there were only two national coalitions in the world at that time that had any credibility: Campaign in Bangladesh and the Brazilian Campaign for the Right to Education. And ActionAid at that time was working on a campaign to build national education coalitions in the mold of Campaign and of the coalition in Brazil. And within the first year, we had 16 national coalitions in different countries bringing together different constituencies. Today, the Global Campaign for Education has national education coalitions in 100 countries and is able to mobilize 10 million people during its Global Action Week. That is something where I think without the positive example of Campaign in Bangladesh, it would have been very difficult to inspire others to set up similar types of campaign and coalitions. I think possibly, I've always been really impressed by the work that has been done in Bangladesh on things like budget tracking, making sure that what money is in the budget arrives at school level, doing social audits, doing tracking, demystifying what the budget should be spent on, and making sure that money arrives. That's absolutely crucial. But as Rashida just pointed out, that's part of the framing that we need to look at. And increasingly, ActionAid developed this 4S framework. We need to pay attention to 4 S's when it comes to the education budget. We need to
Can you break it down, what the 4 S are?
We need to look at the share of the national budget going to education. In many cases, there's an international benchmark of 20% of national budget should go to education. Many countries fall short on that, including Bangladesh. But a good share, 20% share of a small-sized budget is not enough. So you have to look at the size of the budget overall. That's the second S, the size. And the size of the budget is determined by how much tax revenue is collected by the government, how much money is going to debt servicing, and is based also on the sort of macroeconomic policies pursued by the government. So you need to look at that bigger picture of the education budget, of the overall government budget, in order to increase the size of the pie, particularly tax. Because if you have a very low tax to GDP ratio, as is the case in Bangladesh, I think it's about 7%, you simply cannot finance good quality services as a whole, any public services, let alone high quality education. So expanding the tax revenue is fundamental. That's the second S. So we've got to share the budget, the size of the budget. You have to look at it, then you need a good share of a good sized budget. It needs to be sensitively allocated. The third S is sensitivity. And that sensitivity of allocation needs to be driven by equity, making sure that you're trying to bring up those who are most excluded, most marginalized, because when you concentrate on increasing equity, everyone gains. So the third S is sensitivity. But the fourth S is absolutely crucial as well, and that's scrutiny. You need to be able to track the budget in practice, down to the local level, because we know that however much money there is in a budget, however much sensitively it's allocated to drive equity, in the most excluded rural communities, the money often doesn't arrive unless it's independently tracked and monitored. So I think ActionAid in Bangladesh and Campe have done excellent work on that budget tracking, on social audits, making sure the money arrives at school and documenting what's actually happening with the budget in practice. Really, we need to look at all four S's, the size, the share, the sensitivity, and the scrutiny together if we're going to make a breakthrough. And that is a framework which we've now managed to get globally agreed at the United Nations Transforming Education Summit last September, the highest level education meeting that has ever happened, because it was a meeting of heads of state at the UN General Assembly, and they agreed to a framework that recognizes all four S's and particularly looks at the strategic issues affecting the financing of education, the tax justice issues, debt justice issues, challenging austerity, challenging the power of the International Monetary Fund, which is always trying to squeeze public spending rather than expand tax revenues in order to allow for greater public spending.
And you could link it with the SDG goals as well, isn't it? Absolutely, right?
Absolutely. The SDG 4, I mean, that's in a sense the framework that was the foundation of this Transforming Education Summit. We're at the halfway point. These goals were set in 2015 for achievement in 2030. In 2022, we found ourselves with chronic underfunding of public education systems in many parts of the world. And you're not going to make a breakthrough just by a little tweaking here and there, increasing a little bit the share of the budget in different countries. You have to look at the systemic issues of tax, debt, and austerity. We put that on the global agenda. The heads of state agreed. There's a really radical call to action that really reflects ActionAid's position and the positions of organizations like Campaign, of the Global Campaign for Education. But that is now a global call to action from a heads of state summit, the highest level calling for action on education financing that we have seen. So not only do we make a difference at a local level in Bangladesh, in many of the areas we're working in development areas, also at a national level, but we have contributed through that credibility that we've built over the years to achieving global level changes in policy and practice.
So now I want to come to Tanveer. Tanveer, when I joined ActionAid, you all introduced me to DRRS, Disaster Risk Reduction Through School. And whenever there's a conversation about climate change, erratic weather, and young youth and engagement, I always make a reference to that. Now that you are a little removed, do you see the value, how these programs, awareness raising in the curriculum, mobilization that we did, we were actually precursor to a lot of things, and we may have been a little advanced for our time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, starting from DRRS, and I'll cover a couple of other things as well. I mean, the disaster risk reduction work that we did was, again, very cutting edge at that point, working with the international network on education in emergencies and other players globally, but making sure the work that is done, again, transmits nationally. When we translated the handbook from INEE in Bangla, I remember those days. And that work is, again, still becoming much more well-known, because where I work at GPE, we have just started working on climate smart education system. And I think that has again, transmitted from all the early work we have done in Bangladesh, in other countries on disaster risk reduction, but in a broader framework of climate justice, and an arena which should have been connected a long time before, but which is just coming into focus, that climate and education, they need to be interrelated, and education needs to be climate smart. Its curriculum and its delivery needs to be linked. So that's one thing. And speaking of the flexible school calendar, it also reminded me that in the around 2004-5, when we were working on Commonwealth Education Fund and other initiatives with campus members and all, one of the advocacy issues that we picked was flexible school calendar. And the tireless campaigning actually led to that circular that Rashid Abba mentioned in 2008, which was sort of the culmination of that advocacy. Similarly, we also worked on midday school meals, again, an unheard of concept in Bangladesh around that time, but we were able to
And we
introduce that.
not only campaign, for 1 year, we ran the program because there were
Yes.
so many negative responses and perceptions around it. We ran it and we proved that it is possible. And it makes a huge difference in the life of the children who coming from poor background, from marginal background.
Yeah, absolutely. We just did not demand for it. We demonstrated how it can be done well, working through that pilot. And so the way ActionAid Bangladesh worked at that point, thinking globally, but acting locally, getting all these ideas which have been practiced and implemented in other countries at times, but have never been discussed or lobbied for in Bangladesh, but situating it within the unique local context of Bangladesh, and then sort of running through from conceptualizing to demonstrating and then bringing it to the policymakers, while being aware that these changes do not happen overnight. Policy changes take time, and that's why we still see some of these conversations happening on flexible school calendar after COVID, when it gave it particularly, more urgency. And that way, I can say that, ActionAid Bangladesh has contributed to this policy arena from various facets, using various tools and strategies, and in most cases, being very much ahead of its time.
Yeah.
So
can I add something here? Farah,
please,
can I add
Appa,
something
please.
here?
Yes, please.
Particularly with regard to the school meals.
I just wanted to say one thing. Without you, we could not have done the program on midday meal. You trusted us, you trusted ActionAid Bangladesh, and we went to Jamalpur and we did it.
We did it. But not only that we did it, but it also paved the way for government officials and policymakers to think about it, that it's possible. That's why the cabinet approved. You remember we were part of the policy process, the process of preparing a national school meal policy, which was adopted by the cabinet in November 2019. So it was part of, continuing campaign that we were doing together. And ActionAid really showed that it's possible to make it happen. And that's where I suppose we could make a dent into their thinking, actually, the public functionaries and the policymakers. So now they are thinking of reintroducing it. A DPP is being prepared, and the budget, in the recently declared budget, it was declared by the finance minister, of course, under the leadership of our prime minister, that 2023 and 26, there will be a 3-year plan for implementing the school meal policy. But they're still struggling with it. So the whole thing actually came from ActionAid, the whole idea. It pioneered, it proved.
Tanveer, yay, we did it, Tanveer.
Thank you. We did it together.
Yes, absolutely. No, ActionAid Bangladesh and ActionAid generally believes in experimenting and innovating. So I think that has been one of our contributions. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Now, I was just thinking that since Rashid Appa, you talked about us influencing, and then also in the 50 years of Bangladesh, a lot of changes have happened. What about the next 50 years? And what about the next 40 years for ActionAid Bangladesh? So I would like you to share some thoughts on how you see, because I know we could talk for hours, but we do have a time constraint. So one thought that you would like to share where ActionAid Bangladesh should be going, and also about how we can all partner together. Whoever would like to start, I'm ready.
Yeah, okay,
Please,
I'll do it. Let me take this opportunity to thank ActionAid, because, we have launched an alliance of CSOs, civil society organizations. And it's not only a typical NGO, coalition.
In
but
Bangladesh, yeah.
Yes, in Bangladesh, think tanks, women's movement, environmental movement, international, NGOs like ActionAid, everybody was part of it, still a part of it. What we have been trying to, looking back 50 years, we have not yet documented our role and contribution during the last 50 years. So we need to have it. I remember ActionAid doing the 40 years of Bangladesh, assigning somebody to do this. But now it's a coalition process doing the stock taking. What have we done? Where do we stand? And where do we want to go? That kind of a study is being done. It will be completed by this year. And we are expecting to share. Thanks to ActionAid for supporting us from the very beginning in this initiative. So looking forward 50 years, okay, hope ActionAid will be here with us for all
Inshallah.
the civil society, yes, for the civil society organizations, particularly those who are still struggling to, not only to survive, but also go for qualitative campaigning for or advocacy for policy and practice change. That's where community-based organizations are really playing a role. And we would like ActionAid to continue to support coalitions, national coalitions, particularly because, even globally, there is, it's a difficulty to achieve ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, for coalitions or networks. So GP, thankfully, created a window for that. But the local traditional donors, bilaterals particularly, they just want to focus on service delivery, how much money we are pumping and how much we are getting. But for advocacy and networking and campaigning organizations, as you mentioned earlier, it's not easy. It takes time to go for policy and practice change. So hope ActionAid will be in the next 50 years, will be with us, with its pioneering work, with its innovation, with its, commitment to serve, children, learners of Bangladesh, be it, little girls or primary or secondary learners, or even like the Reflect program, even those left out, missed out groups of adult learners. So this kind of focus, we hope ActionAid will be focusing on, not only in education, but other sectors like SDGs, linking it with financing, with climate education, with health education, because COVID has taught us that how much do we need to link education and health. So, and then ICT. We are talking now, using the mechanism, but here is another divide that is widening.
Yeah, absolutely. David,
So,
some thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, picking up on your reference there, Rashida, to reflect, and that's where I started. I think there's a way of working in ActionAid, which is developing innovative approaches and then inspiring others to take up those approaches. So we developed the reflective approach in a tiny scale to begin with in Bangladesh, in 30 remote communities. It was picked up by dozens of different organizations. In fact, across the world, it's fed to about 100 countries and 500 different organizations. It won 5 United Nations International Literacy Prizes. But that as an approach started on a tiny scale in remote villages of Bangladesh. And I think there's something about the way that ActionAid works, which we need to continue to do, that is seeding innovative, groundbreaking work and then inspiring others to learn from that and take it up. That's one thing which we should continue to do over the next 50 years. I think the other thing, which is really more important than anything at the moment, is to recognize the interconnection between the different issues that we're working on and to look to maximize the connections between those issues and between the movements and organizations we work with. So whenever we're working on education, let's be thinking about not just education, but the state of other public services. And you have to start looking at the financing of those services, because the financing is so essential until you get into questions of tax and debt and austerity. But we can't do any work on economic justice and public services that is not critically aware of the climate crisis and the impact of the climate crisis. And all of our work should be making a connection between the climate crisis and the economic justice crisis. And likewise, we cannot be doing anything without putting women's rights right at the center of our work, because women are almost systematically the most excluded group in all of the different threads of work that we're involved in. So I see a really crucial role going forward in showing how we can connect issues, whether we're working on system change for women's rights, system change for economic justice, or system change for climate justice. It's the same system change. So we need to make those connections. We need to glue things together, help people to make connections when they're locked away and working on one issue in a silo, design programs that can help people to make those connections, because it's only by coming together as a much wider set of movements that we're going to achieve the scale of system change nationally and internationally that is actually needed. So I think there's real urgency, and I think ActionAid is well placed to do that over the coming 50 years, and that's something which we should prioritize.
Tanveer?
Well, quickly, so first of all, no one can blame ActionAid for not being ambitious in its advocacy strategy. That has been always the past scenario. And I think that level of ambition to not just look for a small tweak here or a small fix there, ActionAid needs to keep up that ambition to contribute to radical system transformation of education. That can look at many angles, and David and Rashida have covered quite a few. So without repeating that, it's also about being in a climate vulnerable country like Bangladesh. That transformation needs to be responsive to that changing climate. Also, the quality of education to make it fit for the 21st century, so to speak, so that the education system needs to be overhauled, and bringing that ambitious agenda, starting from conceptualizing the changes that need to be made and offering some of those policy alternatives on how that can be done, not just saying that things need to change, but why, how, and where. These are the things that ActionAid has always been very good at sort of conceptualizing. And lastly, the realization that ActionAid must have had in 40 years that change takes time. You cannot just jump from issue to issue. You need to work on issues that you have picked, maybe to tweak it and evolve it to fit with the changing times. But those issues need to be addressed over years, over decades when needed, like we have spoken about flexible school calendar and other issues. So ActionAid to work on those and not working alone like some international NGOs tend to do, but working with its civil society partners and networks like CAMPE, and also mobilizing and leveraging the international relations and the network that ActionAid has to focus on that in the next 40 years. I'm sure that ActionAid has just started in 40 years, and in the next 40 years, it will climb greater heights in a very challenging context of restricted civic space and other challenges that organizations are facing. And it can do that not only on its own, but working with partners like CAMPE, working with partners like us at Global Partnership for Education, where we are also committed to support civil society globally, and finding the strength in alliance and making a journey together to greater change and education for all the children everywhere.
Absolutely. I think, education has to be prioritized across the globe. And while we talk about a lot of development and GDP and growth, but it's hollow. It's really shallow if you go dig a little deeper. And this is why ActionAid Bangladesh has, over the years, tried to make that interconnection that David was mentioning. And, for us, we were talking and trying to support and work with communities for change, but the change would not happen unless we also understood disasters, and we understood climate change, we understood the economics or budget or tax justice. So they're so intertwined. And so far, I think we've all been trying to understand and work towards that. But without the friends, alliances, networks, we will not have come this far. And in the next 40 years, we would need that partnership. We would need that collaboration. And you all being here is a testimony of that we all are in that sort of partnership and equations, and we want to strengthen our alliances. We are up against a lot, the global geopolitics or global climate change, disasters, the lack of commitments, and political actors prioritizing for short-term gains. There are many things that can be said, but at the same time, the best part is being rooted in ActionAid. Our work being with the community across in urban, rural, hard to live places. It has shown us how resilient the communities are, how they have changed their lives. We are just a catalyst, we are just a facilitator, but of course, working together has made that difference. So I can't thank all of you for your time. And this has been an interesting conversation. It's just one of the many conversations. So look forward to again engaging with you. Huge thank you to Rashida for making the time. And, she's always been inspiring, and she still takes on many challenges. David, we are in this together. And as a member of the ActionAid family, we will discuss, challenge each other, and take on new initiatives. So that's exciting. And then you've just said that you will be partnering with us. So I shall hold you to that. And thank you so much for being on this podcast with us. All the best to all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Right. Lovely to be together with you all again. Okay.
It's just the beginning. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the next time, 40 years from now, when we're looking back. I hope we're still together.
Yeah. We'll both be speaking like this, but definitely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.